WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on there. I want to thank you for being with us today. My name is J.W. Simmons. I'm your host. Each and every week, we bring you a guest that can inform us, bring us up to speed, if you will, on what's going on in the community, the state, and sometimes in the nation. Today, we've got someone that has stepped up in a position that is not only critically important, and particularly for small towns and cities throughout the country, has taken on quite a bit, I guess, should I say, quite a bit of responsibility. Chief Anthony Davis is with us. Chief Davis, thank you for being with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, J.W.
I want to start with just kind of looking at your journey, which I found was somewhat interesting when I looked at how you got involved in law enforcement, how you got to where you are now, literally as chief of the organization. But in 2003, you decided to become part of the Clinton Police Department. But the progression, I want to just run through this right quick, and I just want you to kind of tell us what you were thinking at the time before you decided to get in law enforcement. And then, was there actually a plan here? Because it appears that when you started in 2003, you were patrol corporal in traffic unit. Well, everybody knows that that's kind of where a large portion of the activity happens in any department. Thereafter, you were a detective sergeant. You also were in charge of the IT. You actually managed the IT department for the police department and the evidence supervisor. Critical juncture with that between that and the court system. The next step was a police lieutenant over operations and commander for that operations division. The next step, also maintaining lieutenant, was a services commander. Shortly after that, you ended up as assistant chief of police, which puts you right there monitoring and observing the police chief. For a short period of time, you were interim police chief, and just recently, you were named police chief for the city of Clinton. Now, before I get your response, I want to add to that your journey. You had 3 degrees, academic degrees, an associate degree in science from Sam's Community College. Immediately, you got a bachelor's degree. Immediately following that, it was like these steps were laid out. You got your master's degree, an MBA, and I might say top of your class in all 3 of those. Is the light just shining on you, or did you plan all this?
I think it's a lot of work and desire, J.W. Early on in my life, I found that I wanted to be a public servant. I found myself in the fire service before law enforcement. Actually was in it several years, worked in EMS for a couple of years, and then the law enforcement just attracted my eye. What better place could I serve people than to be in law enforcement? So I went right here to Sam's Community College, to BLET, and graduated, and came here to the Clinton Police Department, where the late Marshall Evans gave me an opportunity to be a part of this great organization.
It's interesting. Was there a time that when you were looking at this profession, and I would remind folks as we're talking today, we're talking a historical journey, and we're going to be talking a present day and future journey for law enforcement from your eyes. But was there a time that you questioned, is this something that is going to be sustainable for me and my family? Because you've given up a lot. And just the academic accomplishments tells me that your family didn't have you as much as they thought they did.
Yeah, my wife would always pick on me and say, once I finished up a degree, she'd say, well, are you finished? I'm not quite yet. So I would move forward. I think it goes back to the mentors I had here at the department. Several chiefs, Chief Brim, Chief Tilley, and then Chief Edwards, all worked under. They all gave me a blueprint, basically looking long-term in law enforcement and not just looking short-term. So giving that advice and getting that from them, I had my own plan and goals for myself, and I just moved forward those goals.
clearly training and education has been part of your career. You've had responsibilities and you've took on training roles and you're certified in specialty areas of training now to include firearms and to include driving. You adjunct faculty at the North Carolina Justice Academy. Does that hold true for your leadership role now? Do you kind of say, look, I've done this, and you look at the folks in your department and say, here's the roadmap I see for you? Are you sharing that roadmap?
For me, it's twofold. It's a personal desire for me to give back to the profession. Driving and firearms is something I'm passionate about. We lose a lot of officers in vehicle crashes. So being able to teach in that area was very important to me. But also in a leadership role, absolutely. It's, I can say this is a success for the department. You've seen where I come from. I started as a patrol officer and now I worked my way up to police chief. So I'm trying to give that back to the officers now and give them a roadmap to where I'm at.
When I look at, and folks look at the news, oftentimes they'll see a lot of things that's happening in larger departments. And there seems to be some things that you look at and you go, wonder why that happened, or wonder why that is such a tragedy, whatever it may be. It seems that the medium to small cities in the country, and again, I don't have any data on this, just an observation, seem to be more connected in some way to their communities. Is that a success factor for you? Do you see connectivity issue? We are obviously in a volatile environment. Since the pandemic has started a couple of years ago, 18, 19 months, it's been tough on everybody. How has that impacted you? Roll that out for us just from your observations.
Well, the community aspect of policing is very important. It's something we've worked on here in our department for several years. It's nothing new to Clinton Police Department. It's been years past and it'll be years ongoing. I think having that role in the community is very important. That connectivity with the citizens you serve. When the pandemic stuff rolled around, we couldn't quit. We had to carry on. So that's exactly what we did. But having those relationships and the stakeholders at the table within the community, that stuff is very important to the agency.
You mentioned one of the specialty areas that you teach in and got experience in is driving. That oftentimes comes on the radar with people as being probably one of the most critical moments that officers can make, those huge mistakes that can end up in lawsuits, that can end up in all kinds of situations. What do you do to ensure that your folks have all the current skills and capabilities in operating vehicles and dealing with very high emotional moments in their personal lives?
Well, first and foremost, we need to make sure we get them in driver's training. Driver's training, you go through BLET, you go through specialized driver's training. When you get out of BLET, you need to make sure you go to an agency where that is ongoing. So they're actually putting you back through driver's training. It's an ongoing process. Also, CIT training, crisis intervention training, making sure the officers got the tools they need to recognize, when stressors arise, because, in this profession, they're daily. So being able to recognize those stressors and be able to what to do with those stressors as you move through your career going forward.
The whole scope of law enforcement, and it's almost like you see it as a boiling point, and all of a sudden something erupts and something happens. When you're talking to your folks in your department, and maybe when you look back when you had shift change, how did you address that? How did you kind of express to them your feeling on what their expectation of accomplishment would be? What do you want them to know, and what do you want the public to know that you're saying to them?
It's funny you bring that up. We just had a department meeting, and I spoke a lot on this. Firm foundation, making sure you have a firm foundation with who you are. When you put this uniform on, it don't need to change. So I always tell people, I'm Anthony first, chief second. Mm-hmm. The uniform don't change me. So making sure they understand that when they put their uniform and badge on, it don't change them. They're still the same person. Being able to recognize emotions, We're emotional, we're human beings, so we have emotions. So the officers need to recognize when those emotions get out of check, so we can make sure we check each other and they can check themselves. Just having that firm foundation, knowing where you're going, and having a plan to get there.
How do you monitor what you just explained with emotions? How do you monitor knowing who you are? How do you know what you're seeing in that brief before they go out on the street? It may look good then. Is there a way that you can feel assured that these things is happening, that your expectations? Speak to that.
Well, first and foremost, make sure you got the right people in the right positions. Your supervisors are critical, your first line supervisors. So when they're coming in, making sure you're talking with each other, making sure you're emotionally stable to go out on the road. But also the accountability measures you have in place at your agency. We have several accountability measures, dealing with use of force, vehicle chases. There's a review process for all that stuff that comes through command chain right up to the police chief. So make sure you got those accountability measures in place and that you're reviewing them and they're in place for the officers to see and going forward.
How is the turnover with the Clinton Police Department? Do you have a lot of turnover? Are you anticipating a lot of turnover? We got about a minute before we're going to break here, but I wanted to kind of start that conversation. We might need to go to the next segment with it, but that's always an issue that I'm hearing a lot. We're having officers. It's one of these things. I don't know how long we're going to keep them.
I don't think we're seeing anything out of the ordinary than what other agencies are seeing across the state. There is a law enforcement shortage. We're even seeing it in the academies now. We used to have 20 to 25 per academy. Now we're seeing 12 to 15. But it is an issue across the state, and every agency is seeing it. We're
going to take a quick break. I want to come back and follow up on that a little bit, the whole employment issue. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We're talking with the police chief right here in the city of Clinton. Very likely, Anthony Davis has been around for quite a while with the Clinton Police Department. Which kind of get some info from him on law enforcement in the future. We'll be back in a moment.
Experiencing slow internet? If you have a fast internet package, the problem is most likely your wireless router. With more devices using Wi-Fi, your wireless router may not be able to deliver the speed and coverage you need. We now have the leading solution to enhance your internet experience. Using small devices in a mesh network, these Wi-Fi appliances cover just about any size home so that all your devices can operate to their fullest potential. Whole home Wi-Fi from Star Communications. Get the most out of your internet connection.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us today. We Should Know is on there. Again, I'm J.W. Simmons, your host. We're talking with Chief of Police Anthony Davis. Chief Davis, thank you for being with us today. Always good to have somebody in uniform that, quote, protects and serves. That's an adage that has been around since the days of the LAPD shows on TV back in the 70s and 80s. I remember that little slogan, protect and serve. Has the expectations of the community and the ability to fulfill those expectations from law enforcement or police officers or peace officers, whatever the current title is for a person, have they collided to some degree?
I think so. I think the expectation is, with the information age, is I want it now and I want it right this second. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, in law enforcement, it's not always that way. It takes a little bit of time to gather facts to be able to give that information. So yeah, I think yes, and in fact it has. So again, those relationships are important to say, hey, give us a little bit of time, and then we can release that information.
It's the immediacy of that, the critical issue, as you mentioned today, where we've got, what they call them phones, but we use them for cameras and texting and all this other stuff. Sometimes I question why they call them phones, but that's literally in most folks' hands, that they expect your results and your response to be as immediate as that text message?
Yes, I think so. And I like to call it a mini computer. That's what it is. But yes, I think so. I think the expectation is, we need it right this second. So we need a response right this second.
And you were in charge of IT for the police department. How driven are departments now by technology? And do you see that continuing to expand? And does it take away from the personal interaction?
It's absolutely critical to law enforcement today. And the thing is, we have to change with it. Technology changes daily. So we're having to evolve daily with technology. But it drives just about every program we have at the department, from internal to the beat cops on the road. You have the in-car computers where they're running data. They have the body camera systems, in-car camera systems. Every bit of policing now is involved in some sort of technology that's driving the.
It interests me, and just discussing this just with some folks. I always like to kind of run things by other people, but in discussing this, it became apparent that a lot of folks might not realize. Historically, you had a little book, and you give somebody a pink slip, and it was a carbon, and then that would go to the clerk's office and that kind of thing. But now everything's done by that computer in the car almost instantaneously. Kind of help us see what goes on when that computer is engaged and what information is available to you.
So when an officer said they interact with someone on a traffic stop, there are certain general statutes in place that obligate that officer to do certain things in the car, which they have to run the driver's information through several systems and make sure there's no warrants, they're not wanted. So we're actually governed by statute to do these things. So where a traffic stop may have took a couple minutes before, it may take a little bit longer because now we have different things we have to do by general statute. But they'll get those driver licenses, they'll run them through a system, check your driver license. Then it's also a warrant system that you run through. We also have what we call bias base in the car, where they're having to notate information based on the traffic stop. That's for accountability stuff at the department. And then logging all the other information in the RMS system. So there's a little bit of long process in the car where before, you scratch out the ticket and you give the pink slip like you're talking about, and then you're on your way.
Exactly.
So it is a little bit different.
And that process results in, typically, as you said, you have legal standards you got to abide by when that happens. So for folks that may think, well, I don't know why, are they picking on me or they're not picking on me? Oftentimes you have no idea, especially if it's at night, you have no idea who you're stopping.
That's correct. That is a set standard that is done for everybody. It's not one group or another. It's across the board. So
folks sometimes, I think, get deluded in the fact that you're separating one group from another group, but in reality, it's almost impossible. Especially you couldn't do that because you wouldn't be able to see one way or the other. The other part is it's not an ethical thing that you would do anyway.
That's correct, and it goes back to the accountability measures I was talking about earlier that you have within the department. So these reports we see monthly, and I'm constantly looking at them, reviewing, and seeing if there's anything that needs to be changed, any process we can change going forward to make it better, and also for the accountability part. So those are reviewed monthly for anything that might be out of the ordinary.
Do you get concerned occasionally that we've advanced so far with technology that if we would have a complete collapse of that system, to go back to the fundamentals would be kind of a shock?
Absolutely. We talk about it all the time. When the officer goes to the FTO program,
that's field training officer.
Field training, with us, it's 12 weeks, 12 to 16 weeks, depending on how quick they get through it. I don't let them have a computer. I want them to learn how to be a street cop without a computer, just because of that. In case that computer goes down, I need you to know how to do your job without that computer. So we do that on purpose. So you get to write the paper citations and know how to do that stuff before we give you the technology.
And even to that communication piece, we've advanced tremendously. Law enforcement has advanced tremendously with verbal communication. And we had Mike Hodgson on just a couple of 3 weeks ago that talked about the Viper system in the state of North Carolina and where it advanced to. So if that were removed, and all of a sudden I would suspect that you would start feeling very isolated because now I'm in a world that I don't have that immediate connection.
That's right.
And really here, that would fall into that range of disasters.
Absolutely, and those are ongoing talks we need to have, with EOC and the EM manager. If that stuff was to happen, then it might be reverting back to the old UHF, VHF system. So there's definitely talks to be had and planning in case that stuff happens.
Which kind of leads me to my next question or observation. How critical is it for your department to be connected to all of these other agencies that are around you, and particularly law enforcement agencies, to include the North Carolina Highway Patrol, to include the Sheriff's Department, to include everything from ATF? I mean, there's a number of agencies that are connected. How critical is that piece to a small to medium-sized city?
Well, I'll speak to the local resources first. It's critically important for resource, because I want to speak on specifically quality of life issues. So if you're calling, your quality of life issue may be different from mine. Yours may be a barking dog. Mine may be trash from my next door neighbor. Mm-hmm. So being able to get those to the right resources. You may have mental health workers, mental health issues, those different resources in the community that can help out with those issues where maybe police cannot. Now, the other law enforcement agencies, I think I'm no different than any other leader across the state when it comes to the crime and gun violence. It's important to leverage all our federal, state, and local resources to be able to put these common sense strategies in place to combat violence in our community. So being able to connect with the other agencies and have these resources is absolutely important to the Clinton Police Department.
As towns look at, and we've seen this on the news, folks watching this show will probably be thinking, we'll talk about some of the things that are happening in the area. So let's just look around in the area. We're having departments that are having major upheavals with certain kinds of crimes. I'm not going to get into calling names with cities, but we've seen some towns and cities that's having huge increases in firearms related instances and those kinds of things. How hard is it for somebody in a position, a leadership position like you, to identify that problem and then immediately address it rather than let it continue?
Well, first of all, he's addressing it. Is what we're doing now. As soon as I took interim chief July 1st, there were some strategic plans I wanted to put in place, strictly for gun violence and violent crimes. Mm-hmm. So moving some resources around to get some specialized officers in those positions to strictly, that's all they do is work gun violence and violent crimes in specific areas. And it goes back to an initiative we started in 2015 with our intelligence-led policing, which goes back to all the programs. There was a lot of money spent on programs and stuff you put in place for 5-6 years down the road, which by the end of this year, I think we'll really see the benefit of what we put in place in 2015. And we could talk more about that.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into some of those programs. So the big thing I think folks look at is just kind of that fundamental thought. As people are looking at this show today, I think probably folks may be thinking, well, I just want to feel safe if I have a barbecue in my backyard, that I'm not worried about, somebody deciding to come up and do something extremely strange, or if I go to a shopping location, whatever the store may be, that, that I'm safe, or if, depending on where you're at, that my children are safe. These fundamental things, and either fortunately or unfortunately, we've got historically police officers, law enforcement people that are supposed to make you feel comfortable. The shift has started occurring and has been going on, whether it's pandemic or whether it's national issues that's occurred, that cause people to kind of think, well, I'm not sure. I mean, to me, I was always, and I guess I have to step out of my world, because I was not only brought up in that world, that was the place you found safety, was a badge. Mm-hmm. How do we get back to that? And you got a short time on this, so I want to use this as a lead into the next segment. But that's a critical piece, I think, for us and for you, I'm sure. It is to make folks feel safe. So we're going to take a break. We're going to come back, and so I've set the stage for this third segment. So if folks is listening out there on the radio or whatever, watching on TV, don't change the channel, because this is probably going to be one of the most critical pieces of our discussion today. Is how do we reverse that existing role? Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. Stay tuned. We're talking to the police chief of the city of Clinton, Anthony Davis. We're talking about police officers, how you feel about them.
Every year, 7 million 911 calls are made in North Carolina. 911, what's your emergency?
Will you answer the call? Every second counts. You can be that lifeline. People in crisis look to us for assistance. We provide guidance and support until physical help can arrive at the scene. Join us and make a difference in our community. Be the calm in the chaos. Be the voice in the dark. It's the hardest career you'll ever love. Will you answer the call? Discover more at it.nc.gov/911careers.
Coming to you from Star Communications, Channel 16, WCLN Radio simulcast. We're talking today with the Police Chief, City of Clinton, Anthony Davis. Chief, thanks for being with us again. As we went to break, we wanted to come back this segment, kind of left a lead in there. People often look at police officers from different perspectives. It appears to be many times from their experiential background. What kind of relationship have they had with law enforcement? It may be in another town. It may be in another city. It could be in another state. But the badge is kind of a sensitive object because it reflects no matter what their original or their confrontation or lack of confrontation or if expectation might not have been fulfilled, they see you, they see the Clinton Police Department, and automatically they go in that same mode. How do you deal with the expectation issue versus the reality issue versus some things that you just cannot deal with?
I think for us, we just have to stay involved in the community like we always have. Let them know who we are and how we police Clinton. Being out and engaging the citizens and teaching them how we do business day to day. I don't think you get that in a bigger city. Smaller department, the chief's going to be out in the community. You're going to see me walking downtown. I'm going to be out at the shopping centers. So you're able to approach me and ask me those questions. And if you call and want to speak to the chief, you're going to be able to speak to the chief. Larger agency, you call and want to speak to the chief, you're probably not going to speak to the chief. So that's a little bit different than the smaller agency and the bigger agency. But here, going forward, I'm going to be available. I'm going to be out in the community. So I want you to approach me. I want you to engage me in conversation. I'm not going to shy away from conversation. So let's have those hard conversations and let's talk about it.
And that kind of goes to the conversation that we started about expectations. There are people that look at law enforcement, and if there's a community issue, whether it's housing, whether it's lack of parents to be able to be home with children, whatever it may be, do you think oftentimes the public may look at law enforcement and expect you to correct all of those issues that are going on when you just don't have the capacity nor the capability of doing that? Right.
I think if you look at crime, a lot of people see it as one-dimensional. If crime goes up, it's police fault. Well, crime, there's many facets to the crime. High school dropout rate, the economy, one-parent households. So it's important that you bring your stakeholders and your resources to the table and let's talk about it and say, hey, how can we fix these things in your local community? So by getting, get your school liaisons to the table, getting your local economist, getting all these people to the table, let's talk about it and see what we can do to make it better. Because it's not just a police problem, it's a community problem. So we need your input. We need citizens coming and telling us what's going on in your neighborhood. We need that relationship. Because simply the police, we can't do it by ourselves. We need your help.
One of the things that often strikes me in a question that comes up is to try to increase the understanding of the role of what, quote, law enforcement, again, whatever title you choose, law enforcement, peace officer, whatever it may be, but the role of that officer oftentimes is challenged, but when you get out there and doing your job, your role is an enforcement person, but yet you don't make the rules, protocols, or laws that you're enforcing, but yet you are become the person that is probably, that badge becomes the first place the stone is cast, but you had no involvement other than voting for the person that made that law. And then you've got the judiciary, which is the other part. Help us understand that kind of three-pronged triangle that you exist within, and you are and some people would say the very point of that triangle and get hit first with the blunt end. Talk about that.
It's tough. It's very tough.
I set that up kind of bad. Maybe, I don't know.
But if you look at policing in general, I think it starts with your leadership. You know, who do you have in your leadership role? Who's leading your people? What are you setting for your people going forward? And having these strong procedures and relationships in the community, that stuff is vital for what you just talked about. Mm-hmm. I'd be dismissive to say Anthony Davis is not going to be the end all to crime in Clinton. I'd be a fool to sit here and tell you that. Mm-hmm. But what we can do is set common sense police strategies in place to deter crime, led by intelligence-led policing strategies we set in place 5-6 years ago. And that's exactly what we're going to do. But we need those people coming in and talking and building those relationships. So when stuff like you just talked about happen, you know, you're not going to feel good when an officer pulls you over for 61 and a 35 and writes you a ticket. That's just being honest. Mm-hmm. So when you call down to my office and you're upset about it, you know, there's not much I'm going to be able to tell you other than, you know, there's a court date for that citation. Mm-hmm. You know, you need to go to court if you feel like you weren't speeding or whatever. But we need those relationships in the community, especially in a small town. I tell the officers all the time, you're not a number here, you're a name. Mm-hmm. So when it comes back to the department, they're going to be giving me your badge number, they're going to be telling me your name. So it's important that you have a strong relationship and you have a strong name out there on the road and you're building these important relationships because it's going to carry out through your career in law enforcement.
You've been able to develop that coming up through the ranks of the Clinton Police Department. You've been able to develop that name recognition because you've been engaged in a lot of community activities. And of course, I've known you for a long time. And you just mentioned the officers need to develop that. When you go through that field training operation, somebody's coming out of basic and you put that guy, that person, male or female, out there on the street that's doing that job for the first time, is it hard to get them to feel like, even in a situation that may be somewhat agitated, that their name still becomes very important to that person, even if they have to arrest and incarcerate that person? I want to kind of follow that thread because that's, to me, a pretty profound statement. This guy behind this badge, this person behind this badge is also a human being. Mm-hmm.
I think it's back to what we talked about earlier, having a strong foundation. When you're getting a 20, 21, 22-year-old, you know, straight out of high school, going into college and going through BLET that has no life experience, and then they come on the job, they're not dealing with people in their 50s, 60s with a lot of life experience, and then they're having to tell them what to do or lack thereof, then it is a challenge for them. And some of them find themselves rethinking why they got in the career, which is what we try to tell them in the academy. But it is a challenge. And it's a challenge we'll probably see going forward.
When I'm having this conversation, and I know off air we've talked about a lot of things, but we always kind of revolve back around to the psychological, behavioral health piece. That part of us that, in my experience historically, law enforcement just really didn't get that involved in. If you needed psychological help, we'd send you somewhere. But now we're seeing departments that are hiring whole different units that are not, no background at all in law enforcement, just only behavioral health. Is that something that's going to be impacting even smaller agencies? Is that something that's relatively going to be passed along to an outside agency? How do you see that within towns like Clinton and the same size of Clinton? And quite frankly, the reason I keep saying that is the majority of law enforcement in this country is made up of towns about the size of Clinton, give or take a few thousand people. So we tend to spend so much time looking at the New Yorks and the Chicagos and the LAs that we forget that most of the cops are right in these smaller to medium-sized towns.
Well, I think you look back at what the responsibilities of the officer. They wear many hats on many days. You know, law enforcement hat one day, next day might be a mental health worker. You might be a psychologist. You might be a domestic violence. So looking at the responsibilities placed on the officer, I don't know that society could roll back from officers responding to mental health calls. You know, these were things placed on police by society. So having workers come in that are non-sworn, I don't know that society would accept that, because those people that do those jobs are not going to respond just be honest about it. They're not going to respond to an armed subject without an officer being there. They're just not going to do it. So I just don't see society rolling back on, especially the mental health part of what you were talking about.
That idea and that concept, I think, was born out of some conflicts, of course, out of North Carolina, that resulted in folks saying, well, you know, maybe we need to just demolish the police department and just start over from ground up. Unfortunately, some of the folks that were saying that had little or no idea of what your job is or what your expectations are for the folks that work for you. So when we look at that, what should we do as citizens that's looking at this that says, well, you know, I sort of like what my law enforcement people do, and I'd like to see them feel more empowered to keep my community safe, and they're more concerned with response time of you getting to them than they are all these other issues. How do they support what you guys are doing?
Well, I think, like you said, you got to reach out to the lawmakers, the legislators are making these laws and enforce them. Once they're pushed down, then we're obligated by oath to enforce the general statutes of North Carolina. So reaching out, you know, talking with your legislators and seeing where they're headed with the laws, dealing with mental health. And also just simply coming by the department, you know, letting us know you support us. That's awesome. Going through this process, especially the police chief's process, the support has been overwhelming. You know, I can never imagine in my life of the support I've had over the past 2.5 months going into this chief selection.
And I think that's probably a huge benefit, particularly for a smaller town, is that you're able to garner that.
Absolutely. If you told me 20 years ago I'd be where I am right now, I'd say I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah.
But the support, the mentorship, the community has been great. And absolutely the city of Clinton has assisted me in getting where I am today.
We're going to take another break, and when we come back, I want to kind of finish up today's show with some of the expectations that you hope to fulfill. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. We're talking with the police chief, City of Clinton. We're talking about crime. We're talking about expectations you have and things that hopefully the Clinton PD will fulfill for you. We'll be back in a moment.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of life.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Coming up on the last segment of We Should Know. We Should Know comes to you each and every week on Tuesdays at 2:30. It's simulcast on WCLN Radio. It's originated in Star Communication or Star TV Studios right here in Clinton, North Carolina. Also uploaded to social media platforms, Facebook, YouTube, all those things you're familiar with where you get the time and ability to refresh about different things that we've talked about. A number of other shows out there as well. I want to thank you for your commentary each and every week. Also, on a lot of folks we have on as our guests, the people that are doing the job, the experts in the field. A lot of these folks have years of experience and makes a big difference in what we're talking about. It's subjects they're living each and every day. So if you would like to continue and you haven't maybe reached us, please send us your emails. We particularly like to get those emails at weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. That's weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. If you want to send us a postcard, a letter, or just a shout out, you can also send that through the U.S. Postal Service to Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina. Just address it to We Should Know or WSK, and we'll get that at that post office box. Always appreciate that, and we'll try to give you feedback if you have a question or comment. So look forward to seeing what you have to say about these shows, always a vital part of what we do here. Today we've been talking with the Chief of Police, City of Clinton, Anthony Davis, about a multitude of issues. Anthony, we went to break, and there was so many things that I was mentioning to you that I wanted to cover. I know you've taught at the college and various other places, and I think maybe we could do at least a semester on just action and interaction of law enforcement. But,
Absolutely.
And you do a lot of stuff outside of your role. I think that's important for folks to understand. You do a lot of stuff for schools and youth and athletics and that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, I'm very involved in the community. It's just another part of what I do here in Clinton. You're going to see me out there. You may see me in shorts and a T-shirt.
Yeah.
But like I said, I'm Anthony first, Chief second, so you'll see me out in the community.
Well, I think that's a part of it for people, again, to be recognized as we're real people. You're real people. There's something other than the badge and the enforcement and the justice piece, and that kind of intertwines itself.
It does. Absolutely.
When the development of what we have done and where we are recently, I want to touch on Senate Bill 300, the criminal justice reform package that was passed in September, just a couple of months back. There's a lot of moving parts to that, but it gets involved in everything from recruiting of officers, who's qualified, to it gets into requiring intervention mechanisms, and it limits local laws that deal with issues that may be impacted by poverty. Some towns now are really facing an overwhelming number of homeless people.
Right.
When you look at that particular bill and its passage, is there anything there that impacts you or that you want to reflect on as we kind of draw to a conclusion this last segment?
Well, as a CLEA accredited department, we're already doing most of what's in the bill. We're at the forefront of the national police practices across the nation. Mm-hmm. So we're constantly reviewing those and putting the best practices in place. So I commend our accreditation for doing that and the officers of the Clinton Police Department. So we're constantly looking at the different things that were in the reform bill. There's many of that stuff that's going to be changing with other departments, but for us, it may be a tweak here and there in policy, but as far as day-to-day business, we're already doing it.
Part of a lot of what's in that bill is things, as you said, a lot of departments is already doing. Other things relates to looking at officers' backgrounds as it relates to have they had a history of, is there a violence issue, have they been in a lot of or more than one or even one assault case. There's also on a national level some discussions in a bill on the national level that would require officers and police chiefs like yourself, if an officer is involved even in a traffic stop, to report it federally. There's pushback on that. What's your thoughts on being part of a huge federal bank of computer information that is tracking everything that you and your officers are doing?
I think misconduct is one you have to look at very strong at. I could pride ourselves in our backgrounds. When we hire somebody, we simply don't just sign off and we hire them. Mm-hmm. We do a thorough background. We leave no step unturned. We're visiting the last departments they're working at. We're talking with the family. Everybody that put on their paperwork, we're going through that thoroughly with their background. Misconduct is one I think you got to look at when you're reporting to a federal agency. Depending on the type of misconduct, it just depends on what the type of crime is, in my mind, for the reporting.
In 2020, the North Carolina Association of Police Chiefs put out a report, and a lot of the principles in this report dealt with violence or death issues involving law enforcement. And one of the comments, I just wanted to get your feedback on one of the conclusion comments on that report. It says the North Carolina Association of Police Chiefs wants to be clear that our goal is to preserve life and improve this quality of life in the communities for which we work and police, and to improve the quality of life. Life seems to be the issue, which leads us to the conversation or observation about use of force. Talk to us a bit about where that use of force escalation standard is now. Historically, we've looked at it. I can look back a little bit further than you can. Yeah. And we never really looked at it as escalation of force. The tool belt that you wear
Right.
Has certain things on it. One of those is the ultimate escalation of force. And that's either a 40 caliber or whatever kind of weapon it is that literally can take somebody's life. Talk to us about escalation of force. I think that's a critical part of this
Absolutely.
whole conversation today.
Absolutely is. If you look back, I think first and foremost it starts off with training. What are you training your people? And how much training you're giving your people? And what tools are you giving your people during that training?
Mm-hmm.
Something we do at the PD is, you have 24 to 26 hours of in-service mandated annually. We do about 100 hours of in-service annually. So we pride ourselves on training we give the officers. So giving them the tools to be able to use in the field. The de-escalation techniques. Understanding is it a situation that can be de-escalated? Or is it something you're walking into that you're not going to be able to de-escalate? That training is imperative to be able to recognize the difference in that de-escalation. You may walk right into a situation that you're not going to be able to de-escalate. So having that training is imperative to be able to recognize those signs. The tools, again, there's general statutes and case laws that come down that affect the way you can use certain tools. The biggest case I can remember is with the taser. Taser come out as a compliance tool and then was reversed, and now you cannot use it as a compliance tool. You have to have some kind of immediate danger before you could deploy the taser. And they also impacted intermediate weapons into the same case law. So that stuff's impacted, but if you're not teaching it, you're not having that training and giving the officer the tools they need, then they're not going to be able to recognize it.
What one piece of that, of those tools that you have, do you want the citizens and the public to be aware of, that when you enter a situation, what you access first? And I say that with all due reference to, a lot of folks get their perspective of what law enforcement is from TV shows. And these, of course, we know TV shows are staged, right, and you get do-overs. You don't get that in law enforcement. So oftentimes they see a law enforcement officer, if he pulls his revolver, or his gun rather, used to be revolvers back during the day. You pull a gun out of your holster, that was a pretty big deal, and folks now say you don't need that anymore. Maybe you need to just leave that at home.
Yeah.
Walk us through that right quick, because we got about a couple of minutes left here to talk about something that needs a semester.
Yeah, officers are going to they're going to revert back to their training, first and foremost. Again, that's why training is imperative. Depending on what level of resistance they're meeting, depends on what level of tool they're going to use to meet that resistance. As police chief, telling the community, if you're involved in any use of force or any interaction with law enforcement, compliance is number one. Please comply. If you feel like you're being done wrong or you want to complain, let's do it after the situation's over. Come and see me at the department. Let's talk about it. But while you're on the side of the road or going through that incident with that officer, is not the time to non-comply with what he's asking you to do. So comply, and then come down and complain, and let's talk about it.
I think that's so important what you just said, and I wanted to kind of be honest with you. I wanted to kind of end on that. The compliance issue and defiance seem to collide for law enforcement. If you look back at a lot of the issues that has resulted in severe injury or death, has been around that idea of compliance. And oftentimes I hear officers say that in today's world, they may stop somebody for something that's very minor and have probable cause to stop them. But that person will look at them and say, you can't do that. I'm not going to comply. And from there, that escalation goes to the level of bodily injury or death. Absolutely.
I think it just goes back to disinformation. What you're seeing on YouTube and social media, what you may be seeing on that platform may not apply to North Carolina law. So if you're seeing those guys saying, I'm not giving you my driver's license, or I'm not stepping out of the car, that may apply in another state. But here in North Carolina, it applies. You got to present that North Carolina driver's license when you're at a traffic stop, or you got to step out of the vehicle if you're asked to step out.
Do what the officer asks once you're stopped or once you're engaged. I want to thank you, Chief, for being with us. We're going to have to go to close. I hope to have you back You have a open invitation anytime you want to come in and sit down and have a conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. We look forward to seeing you again next week. And as always, we say to you, may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.